Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to picture something. It's November 1970. You've got two of America's absolute top national security minds, Admiral Elmo Zumwalt and Henry Kissinger. They're sitting together on this special military train, right? Heading to the Army-Navy football game. It sounds like a fun, relaxed outing, but man, the conversation takes a really dark turn. Kissinger looks at Zumwalt and basically says he thinks the United States has passed its historic high point. He literally describes the Soviets as Sparta to our Athens, saying we just don't have the stamina to stay the course. In his mind, historical forces favored the rival, and America was locked into this inevitable decline. Well, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're demystifying the whole complex and honestly, highly misunderstood dynamic of US-China relations, and we're going to see exactly why that incredibly gloomy train ride from 50 years ago is actually absolutely crucial to understanding the geopolitical chessboard we're looking at today.
You see, that deep gloominess Kissinger felt back then? Yeah, it's back in full force today across American strategic circles. Only this time, it's aimed squarely at an ascendant China. But here's the fascinating part. These modern anxieties about a rising China are actually part of a recurring theme that goes back 50 years. Political scientist Samuel Huntington completely hit the nail on the head back in 1988. He pointed out that the United States is actually unlikely to decline, as long as its public is periodically convinced that it's about to. It's kind of paradoxical, right? But this very panic, this whole idea of declinism, is exactly what sparks America's unique superpower, its capacity for self-correction. The pessimists are actually preventing the exact doom they keep predicting.
Which brings us to Section 1, the illusion of decline. Let's look at these 5 waves of anxiety.
So let's trace the historical data here, because it really shows how our current panic is, well, it's basically routine. Political scientist Rush Doshi maps out these 5 waves of declinism over the last century. Think about it. Wave 1, the 1930s. The Great Depression hits. Panic sets in, but what happens? It spurs the massive, game-changing innovations of the New Deal. Then Wave 2, the 1957 Sputnik shock. Everyone freaks out that the Soviets are winning space, which triggers this unbelievable reinvestment in U.S. research and education. Wave 3 is the 1970s, stagflation, Vietnam. This is exactly when Kissinger was feeling so down. But that era led to major civil rights reforms and cemented the dollar's global dominance. Then we get to Wave 4 in the 1980s. People were terrified about the rise of Japan and Germany, but that anxiety basically pushed the U.S. to completely harness the IT revolution. And that brings us to today, Wave 5, running from 2008 to the present. We're obsessing over China's rise in our own domestic crises, but the pattern is clear, right? Time and again, the U.S. bounces back through massive domestic adjustment.
Moving on to Section 2, the death of engagement and why the old rulebook completely failed. Okay, so this raises a pretty huge question. If we've successfully navigated rising powers before, why did our decades-old strategy toward China, this idea we called engagement, just completely fall apart? To get that, we need to look at what China scholar David Shambaugh calls the missionary complex. Basically, for centuries, America's held on to this somewhat paternalistic expectation that it could literally shape China, mold it to move in a more modern and liberal direction. And historically, this creates a massive love-hate cycle. When China seems to be playing along, everything is stable. But the moment China's own nationalism flares up and they actively resist that American paternalism, the relationship rapidly fractures and becomes incredibly bitter.
Let's actually walk through exactly how this latest fracture played out, step by step. For decades, you had this huge, diverse group of Americans. We're talking government officials, university leaders, big business executives, who all formed this broad engagement coalition. The overarching belief was that interacting with China was a total win-win. But, step 2, as China grew stronger, particularly under Xi Jinping, Beijing started pushing back really hard against those American expectations. Which leads to step 3. Those diverse American actors, they started peeling away one by one because they realized, hey, wait a minute, our interests are actually being harmed here. And that paved the way for step 4, the emergence of a brand new, highly bipartisan, counter-China coalition right here in the U.S. The engagement era was officially over. Section 3, a changing global landscape and the geopolitical chessboard. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it shifts our focus outward.
We really can't view U.S.-China relations in a vacuum, right? We have to zoom out and look at the broader international environment, which is rapidly evolving into what experts call a trifurcating world. Basically, it's splitting into 3 major global trends that are totally reshaping the board. First, you have a revitalized West. NATO is arguably stronger and more unified than it's been in years. Second, we're seeing this massive diffusion of power toward the global South, where you've got about 140 nations really starting to flex their geopolitical influence. And third, and definitely the most concerning, is the emergence of a brand new, deeply entrenched axis of illiberal authoritarian states. When you objectively contrast the alliances on the board right now, the structural differences are just staggering. On one hand, the United States currently enjoys the massive advantage of 56 formal allies, and by formal, I mean actual, binding, mutual defense treaties across NATO, the OAS, and the Asia-Pacific. On the flip side, that newly emerging axis of illiberalism, it really only consists of 4 states: Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. Now, sure, they do offset each other's vulnerabilities to an extent, but they are incredibly isolated on the world stage, heavily sanctioned, and here's the kicker, they have 0 real, formal allies of their own.
However, within that four-nation axis, the relationship between China and Russia is without a doubt the most consequential partnership for the United States in the West. Make no mistake, this relationship is currently at its highest, closest level ever. It actually exceeds the formal alliance they had back in the 1950s. They share a deeply rooted strategic outlook that's entirely anchored on opposing global liberal norms. And this entente actively shores up their intrinsic vulnerabilities, which poses a direct, systemic challenge to the entire liberal international order.
That brings us to Section 4, America's Hidden Advantages, Reality versus Declinism. It's really easy to look at that emerging axis and just slip right back into that exact same declinism Henry Kissinger felt on that train in 1970, isn't it? But let's counter that pessimism with some hard data. So the crucial point is the number 25%. Think about this. Throughout almost the entirety of China's massive 4-decade economic rise, the United States has consistently held on to roughly a quarter of the entire world's gross domestic product. 25%. The popular narrative out there is always that China is just gobbling up the global economy at America's expense. But this statistical fact, it proves the U.S. share of the global pie has remained incredibly resilient.
The declinists also tend to completely ignore China's very real, very serious systemic vulnerabilities. We're talking about a fast-aging population, absolutely enormous national debt, and a growth rate that is actively, measurably slowing down. Contrast that with the U.S., which retains some incredibly unique structural strengths. We have a relatively young demographic profile, ongoing global financial dominance through the US dollar, and a fiercely innovative economy. Plus, America's open society and civic creed actively attract global talent, ambitious immigrants, and capital. That's a huge structural advantage that closed, authoritarian societies just fundamentally struggled to replicate.
Section 5, Strategy, Assertive Competition, and the New Playbook. So because that old strategy of engagement is officially dead and buried, the United States has permanently replaced it with a new, comprehensive paradigm. It's called assertive competition. And listen, this isn't just about slapping tariffs on goods or moving naval ships around the Pacific. This rivalry is indefinite, and it's completely multidimensional. It covers everything: the military, cutting-edge technology, ideology, even global diplomacy and soft power. Assertive competition basically means the U.S. has to constantly play both offense and defense at the same time. We have to strengthen ourselves internally while actively pushing back against any behavior from Beijing that challenges American interests.
The pragmatic, everyday mantra for this new playbook is to compete constantly, cooperate selectively. The reality is, the US and China have far more differences than commonalities right now. But they still share a planet, so they have to cooperate on critical global governance issues. Things like climate change, artificial intelligence, global pandemics, nuclear non-proliferation, and counterterrorism. But it's a tightrope walk. The key for the US is to pursue this selectively and carefully avoid Beijing's favorite diplomatic tactic, linkage. That's when China demands a major concession in a highly competitive area, just as the price for getting them to the table on an issue that affects the whole globe. We simply can't fall for that.
And as we navigate this fiercely competitive era, we really have to stay grounded in reality. Total social and economic decoupling, it is an empirical impossibility. Yes, there's a ton of institutional fracturing happening between the two governments, but you literally cannot just take a giant pair of scissors and sever two societies that share $575 billion in goods trade. You can't just undo the fact that there are 160,000 Chinese students sitting in U.S. universities right now, or erase the deep, deep ties of millions of immigrants. Like it or not, we are firmly locked in a state of competitive interdependence.
Section 6, the choice of decline, rising to the challenge. And this brilliantly illustrates the core message we need to take away today. As we look back at those historical waves of anxiety, and as we weigh the deep structural advantages America still holds today, our final takeaway becomes crystal clear. National decline is absolutely not some inevitable historical force. Decline is a choice.
Over 60 years ago, right in the wake of that Sputnik shock, John F. Kennedy gave this amazing speech in Canton, Ohio. He talked about this lingering feeling that America had somehow reached its maturity, that we were heading into a long, slow afternoon. Kennedy completely, flat-out rejected that view. So the ultimate question for us today as we face down this intense new era of assertive competition is exactly the same. Are we going into the long, slow afternoon, or will we rise to the challenge? Think about it, and keep questioning the narratives that shape our world.